The two operas, which I am about to discuss on this side of the record, are based on actual historical events and are connected with important political upheavals. Meyerbeer's Le Prophète deals with John of Leyden, who, between 1530 and 1536, joined the fanatical sect of the Anabaptists and had himself crowned German emperor in the city of Münster. The political turmoil that made his short but spectacular career possible is known as the Revolt of the Peasants. Poulenc's work is set against the background of the French Revolution. The tragic death of the Carmelite nuns is a direct result of the decree issued in the year 1792 by the French National Assembly, ordering all monasteries and nunneries dissolved and all religious observances discontinued. The opera ends with a well-known historical happening, the guillotining of 16 Carmelite nuns who were accused of having willfully disobeyed the anti-religion decrees of the government. It is thus clear that both Le Prophète and the dialogues of the Carmelites are concerned with political uprisings and with their effects on religious beliefs. Nonetheless, in the dramatic and musical treatment of this common subject matter, the two compositions are worlds apart. The Meyerbeer opera is played against massive and spectacular scenery, calls for the participation of several separate choral and dancing groups, each numbering many dozens of performers, and deals with soul-shattering emotional conflicts. Compared to the super grand Le Prophète, Poulenc's Tale of the Carmelites is modest in the extreme. As its descriptive title, Dialogues, indicates, it consists mostly of conversations between two characters. It so happens, however, that these conversations deal with spiritual problems of extraordinary depth and intensity, and Poulenc's music succeeds in illuminating both the anguish and the bliss of the human condition with a clarity and a charm that is unique in the field of opera. Calling Meyerbeer's Le Prophète super grand is, on the other hand, by no means an exaggeration. Its text was fashioned by the foremost French expert in this field, none other than Eugène Scribe, the author of dozens of librettos and one of the creators of the so-called well-made play. In Scribe's texts, everything is prepared and everything is explained. The hero of the opera, Jean, is presented at first simply as a man who wants to marry a girl from a nearby village and who hopes to continue his peaceful existence as a popular innkeeper in a suburb of the Dutch city of Leyden. It is true that Jean is plagued by a strange dream in which he sees himself crowned in a cathedral and acclaimed as the Messiah. But when some visiting Anabaptist preachers assure him that his dream can become a reality, Jean believes that they are only teasing him. This dream, nevertheless, becomes one of the cornerstones of the plot. The music accompanying Jean's telling of it features two themes of great importance. Here is one. And here is the other. These themes, which sound quite gentle at this point, will receive a mighty development in the cathedral scene of the last act, when the dream will indeed turn into a tremendously impressive reality. The first theme will be sung at first very softly by a chorus of children who acclaim Jean as the Son of God. Then, however, the entire congregation will intone this melody in a mighty fortissimo. second theme will be transformed into the famous Coronation March. In the meantime, the three itinerant preachers have noticed Jean's resemblance to a painting of King David in the Münster Cathedral. When they are told that Jean knows most of the Bible by heart, they form a plan to use him for their own ends. They urge him to assume the role of a religious leader, telling him that he could indeed be crowned emperor, and that in that guise he could help the common people, who are now persecuted and oppressed by the noble lords. Jean answers them in a charming song describing his very simple needs and desires, all connected with his feelings for his fiancée and for his mother. When the preachers leave, Jean remains alone, waiting for the return of his mother, Fides, who has gone to the village of Dordrecht to fetch his fiancée, Berthe. Jean does not know what the audience has learned in the first scene of the opera, namely that the lord of the Dordrecht castle, Count Oberthal, has taken a shine to the pretty Berthe, and that when she resisted his advances, he has arrested both Jean's fiancée and his mother. The calm of Jean's tavern is shattered when Berthe rushes in, disheveled and barefoot, to tell Jean that as Count Oberthal and his soldiers were taking her and his mother to another of Oberthal's castles, she managed to escape, and now wants Jean to hide her from her pursuers. No sooner has Berthe found a hiding place under the staircase of the inn than Count Oberthal and his soldiers appear, ordering Jean to surrender Berthe. Otherwise, they threaten to kill his mother, who is still in their hands. And here we witness the first of the great emotional conflicts of the opera. Jean has to decide which of his loved ones he will sacrifice. His loyalty to his mother prevails, and Berthe is returned to the custody of Oberthal's soldiers and taken away, after which we hear the most famous solo number of the opera, Fides' aria, O mon fils, wherein she thanks her son for having saved her life, even though it meant the loss of his beloved Berthe. But Jean's experience with the threats of a noble lord brings about a change in him. He is now ready to assume the leadership of the rebellious peasants and is willing to join the Anabaptist movement, even though pretending to be the Messiah will mean that he must forever abandon his mother and Berthe and forget everything that was dear to him in the past. At first glance, Le Prophète seems to be a typical romantic opera in which well-known historical events are embroidered with invented love affairs. And yet, Le Prophète is also very different, because the heroine of the opera is not the soprano Berthe, whom Jean was planning to marry, but his mother, the mezzo-soprano, Fides, who is most definitely the leading lady of the show. The Fides of the 1849 world premiere of the opera was Pauline Viardot, one of the legendary French prima donnas, and ever since then, outstanding productions of this work have depended on the availability of exceptionally gifted mezzo-sopranos. The artist impersonating Fides must be the mistress of every conceivable expressive coloration of her voice, from whispers and soft moans to the wildest shouts and exclamations. Possessing such vocal resources is not enough, however. Fides is also dramatically the most important character in the plot. She is the chief participant in that crucial conflict in the cathedral scene of the last act, when, by retracting her claim that Jean is her son, she saves him from certain death at the hands of his own followers. This dramatic climax is very cunningly prepared by Scribe. Fides was led to believe that her son was dead, killed by orders of the newfangled German Messiah. She is present at the coronation ceremony and hears the choir sing the praises of the prophet, saying that he was not born of woman, but is the Son of God. Suddenly she becomes aware that this supposedly supernatural being is her own Jean. When she claims him as her son, Jean's worshippers are stunned. If what that woman says is true, then their hero is a liar and a wicked pretender. Jean acts quickly. He tells the people that the woman is demented and that he will exorcise the demons that possess her. He orders the soldiers to point their lances at his heart, telling them to kill him unless he can cure the woman of her delusions. He then asks Fides if she still believes him to be her son. The strain is too great for the mother. Ah, she says, listen to me. No, no. And she's forced to admit that she has no son. Fides' vocal line now traverses the full extent of a mezzo-soprano's range, almost 2.5 octaves from a low G to a high B natural. No, she says, no, I have no son. The Anabaptists, accompanied by the strain of the church organ, intone a hymn invoking God's blessing on the new king of the Germans. The populace, amazed at the startling change in the demented woman's attitude, is ecstatic over the mighty miracle wrought by the prophet king. And amid these multiple exclamations, exultations, and jubilations, the curtain comes down on one of the grandest scenes in all grand opera. This, however, is not the end of the story. In the final moments of the opera, the audience is regaled with still another startling display. Scribe and Meyerbeer were constantly on the lookout for unusual theatrical effects with which to amaze and delight their public. In Le Prophète, they managed to introduce 2 brand new artifices. One of these was the ice skating extravaganza of the 3rd scene, which is usually omitted nowadays. The other one occurs at the very end of the opera, when the emperor's palace in Münster is destroyed amid explosions, flames, and crumbling walls. Its musical presentation is also handled very cleverly. Jean, who has planned his own death as well as that of his enemies, is distracting everyone with a rousing drinking song. This display of gaiety is then suddenly converted into a scene of nightmarish destruction. The prophet's mother arrives just in time to join her son in a high B flat, and as the curtain falls, everyone perishes in flames. While Le Prophète is a show that depends for its effect on much external splendor, the Carmelites could well be called the tale of a person's transformation. The person is Blanche de la Force, the daughter of a French nobleman, and her transformation is a very slow and gradual process during which she changes from a frightened girl who lives in constant fear of death to a calm and even exultant martyr who, without being forced to do so, freely joins her 15 companions and perishes with them under the knife of the guillotine. Blanche's father is a tired and disillusioned member of the old aristocracy, a man without any real intellectual or religious convictions, and so is his tired and inconclusive musical theme, which is the very first orchestral phrase we hear as the curtain rises. The Marquis feels that Blanche's difficulty is temporary, and that once she is married, she will get over her insecurity and nervousness. Blanche's brother, the Chevalier, worries about his sister, whom he calls his little rabbit. When he learns from his father of the unusual circumstances surrounding Blanche's premature birth, when her mother was badly frightened by a street riot, the Chevalier becomes convinced that fear has permanently entered his sister's soul like a worm that gnaws at the core of a piece of fruit. It is clear that Blanche's relatives have little, if any, effect either on her decisions or on her spiritual development. She looks for a place where she might be sheltered from the world and its multitudinous dangers. And at first glance it would appear that the convent of the Carmelites, with its strict discipline of prayer and obedience, would offer Blanche the desired haven of safety. In the second scene of the opera, during which the young girl is interviewed by the prioress of the convent, one gets the impression that Blanche's decision to join the nuns was a healthy one, and that within this congregation of dedicated women she would find her hoped-for peace of mind. The music of this interview scene is filled with the confidence and nobility of religious faith. During her stay with the Carmelites, Blanche is exposed to several influences, each representing a contrasting type of religious attitude. There are two prioresses who come from different social strata, one from the nobility, the other from common stock. Other important characters are the assistant prioress, Mother Marie, and the father confessor. Finally, there is a very young novice, Sister Constance, who is the prime mover behind Blanche's transformation, and whose example and attitudes to life and death have a decisive influence on Blanche. The point is that Constance has enjoyed herself innocently and immensely before becoming a nun, is enjoying her life in the convent, and finds the thought of death to be the most natural thing in the world. Poulenc makes all this amply clear by giving Constance a sprightly hopping tune when she tells Blanche how gaily she, Constance, danced at her brother's wedding just 6 weeks before joining the convent. And then we hear the very same tune when Constance observes in connection with the sickness of the old prioress, but really, when one is 59 years old, is it not high time to die? Constance's attitude regarding her own eventual demise is even more revealing. "I have always wished I would die young," she says. And when Blanche becomes very upset at Constance's words, the young novice makes an even more significant comment, which she directs at Blanche with the most charming and naive expression. "As soon as I laid my eyes on you, I knew that my wish had been granted. I knew that God would do me the favor not to let me grow old, and that we would die together, you and I." The later part of this conversation is accompanied by a most tender and consoling sequence of harmonies that recurs whenever the composer wants to emphasize the true essence of religious faith and fervor. The plot of the opera, if one can speak of a plot in a drama which deals with the mysterious workings of a higher power, is hard to narrate in a concise form. Still, there is a succession of 3 frightening events that impress themselves mightily on Blanche's mind. First, the death of the old prioress. Then, the central theme of the opera, the government's decision to abolish the convent of the Carmelites. And finally, another crucial happening, Mother Marie's suggestion that all Carmelites should take a solemn oath of martyrdom. Each of these events has the immediate effect of scaring and disorienting Blanche, and in each instance, it is the young novice, Constance, who by her words and behavior sets things straight, and who exemplifies the simple goodness of the human heart and the serene confidence of true faith. The death of the first prioress, Madame de Croissy, is witnessed by Blanche, and it serves as a shocking object lesson for the impressionable young girl. Before the prioress finally passes away, she goes through an agonizing mental and physical experience, which is graphically reflected in Poulenc's music. Watching the anguish of a saintly old lady who had spent her life in prayer and preparation for her last hour, and who still suffers such fearful torments, reinforces Blanche's neurotic conviction that one can never overcome one's dread of dying. In a later scene, when Blanche and Constance gather flowers for the prioress's grave, Constance comments on what she calls the troublesome and difficult death of the prioress. "One would think," she muses, "that in giving her this kind of death, our good Lord had made an error, as in a cloak-room when they accidentally give you the wrong garment. Yes, I think her death belonged to someone else." We hear once more the music of the approach of death. This is, by the way, the same solemn march tune that will accompany the nuns on their way to the guillotine. But as Sister Constance expatiates on the prioress's final moments, we also hear another recurring motif, the lovely musical sequence that always seems to erase all fear. And over this touching harmonic sequence, Sister Constance sings the consoling words, "It means that someone else, when it will be his turn to die, will be surprised that he finds it so easy and that it feels so comfortable." The advent of the revolution threatens the very existence of the convent. Nuns and priests are about to be treated as enemies of the state. Blanche becomes intensely concerned that the revolutionary mob might capture the convent's father confessor and kill him. But the kindly priest, trying to reassure Blanche, tells her not to worry. He will hide and disguise himself, he says, so that the enemies of the church will never find him. Here again, little Constance shows a much more courageous spirit. "No, indeed," she says, "the French people will not let their priests perish. They will defend them." The final event that upsets Blanche's precarious mental equilibrium is the Oath of Martyrdom taken by the members of the convent. Mother Marie, the assistant prioress, takes advantage of the temporary absence of her superior, Madame Lidouane, and decides to urge the nuns to make a statement of protest against the anti-religion propaganda of the adherents of the revolution. The nuns are assembled in the chapel of the convent, which has by then been completely devastated. Everything is dirty, and bunches of straw and pieces of plaster are lying around on the floor. But the music that opens this scene is still set in the firm and noble dance rhythms of the old-fashioned sarabande, to symbolize that even in this catastrophic time of upheaval, the ancient flame of confident faith burns with undiminished force. Mother Marie recommends that the nuns should pledge themselves to sacrifice their lives if such a step should someday prove useful for the spiritual health of France and for the survival of the Carmelite order and of their religious rituals. Before this oath of martyrdom can be administered, however, each nun must tell the father confessor in secret that she agrees to do so, and the decision must be unanimous. Should any one of the nuns express an unwillingness to take the oath, the entire project would be instantly dropped. The members of the convent are quite aware that Blanche is unable to face danger of any sort. Some of the nuns whisper audibly that of course one knows who might be the dissenting person, so that when Mother Marie is informed by the father confessor that there is in fact one vote against, the nuns are not surprised. They are all the more amazed when immediately following Mother Marie's announcement, Sister Constance speaks up, saying that it was she who voted against the oath. She immediately continues, however, adding that she repents her decision and begs the others to permit her to change her mind. Constance calls upon the father confessor to bear witness to her statement, and he, unwilling to create additional dissension, does not reveal that the young girl is in fact telling an untruth. Blanche has not the fortitude of mind and soul to contradict Constance, and the two of them, being the youngest members of the convent, are the first ones to take the oath. While the other nuns busy themselves with the oath-taking ceremony, Blanche escapes from the convent, never to return. She now decides to follow the advice of the father confessor, to hide and to disguise herself. Since the Marquis, her father, has been arrested and his house turned into a hostelry for common laborers, Blanche returns home and hires herself out as a cook. She is fairly confident that no one would think of looking for her in her own father's house. The elegant library of the Marquis, which we saw in the opening scene of the opera, has been turned into a grubby kitchen, and here Blanche feels she is relatively safe from danger. After her experience with the Oath of Martyrdom, she imagines that the whole world despises her for her cowardice. In the meantime, the prioress of the convent and 14 of her charges, including Constance, have been arrested for refusing to disband. The Revolutionary Tribunal decides to make an example of them and sentences them to be guillotined. It is ironic that Mother Marie, at whose behest the Oath of Martyrdom was taken, does not join them. The Father Confessor persuades the assistant prioress that she has no binding obligation to the other nuns and that the good Lord will not hold her to her promise. Thus it becomes clear that in matters of conscience, the seemingly strong are often the weakest, while those who seem to be the weakest are sometimes transformed into saints and martyrs. We are not told what makes Blanche change her mind. It is my guess that it is the unbearable thought that Sister Constance would perish without having her, Blanche, by her side. Constance herself, even though the other nuns laugh at her, is convinced that Blanche would join them at the ultimate moment. And so it comes to pass. In the final march to the scaffold, the nuns sing the Salve Regina hymn, and we hear the successive dull thuds of the guillotine's knife, as one by one the number of the singing voices diminishes. Finally, only Sister Constance is left marching and singing, but at this moment a new voice is heard, and Blanche is seen walking serenely and triumphantly to join Constance in death.